So there's this game, right? You may have heard of it. It's called Hearts of Iron 4. It's okay, I've played it once or twice, and before you say anything, no, I have never felt the touch of a woman. Anyways, the game is some pretty good mods that are basically entirely new games. One of them is Kaiser Redux. It's basically Kaiserreich, but better, with a lot more wacky shit filling in the gaps. One path in particular is very interesting, to say the least. Basically, if you play the Constitutional American Republic and go down the Invisible Empire tree, get Armstrong in the following section, then fuck up a smallpox epidemic, you get the choice between two memey individuals. One of them is George Lincoln Rockwell, who is a fucking character in and of himself, and the other is the topic of today's video, the man, the myth, the inventor of gaming himself, Francis Parker Yockey. And oh boy, if you go with him, buckle your seatbelt, because he takes you on a hell of a ride. Now, after playing this route, for the shits and giggles, I started wondering if a person this batshit insane could actually exist. So I did a little reading, and Yep, he's a little goofy. My first thought was to write him off as your standard run-of-the-mill radical right-wing crazy, which he is. But surprisingly enough, he's a little more complex than that. Francis would be born on the date of his birth in 1917 in Chicago, Illinois. From a young age, he was known as being a very smart cookie, proving himself to be very talented with the piano. His parents were aggressive in their opinions regarding the superiority of European culture, and this would rub off on the young Francis. The arrival of the Big Sad saw the family move to Ludington, Michigan, where soon after Yockey would begin his adult life. He quickly became rather enraptured by the works of a certain Oswald Spengler. If you don't know who he is, he essentially believed that all cultures act like a living thing and thus live and die in relatively predictable cycles, which he explained in his aptly named work, The Decline of the West. This theory essentially stated that race was not purely biological, but exists more as a matter of opinion and spirituality more than anything. However, in contrast to Spengler, Yockey was comically racist and loved the Nazis. Loved. He was violently anti-Semitic and really had a thing for Hitler. Hell, I'm skipping ahead of this, but he straight up dedicated his most famous book to him, or at least that's implied. But we'll get to that in a minute. He attended multiple universities throughout the 30s, even having one of his essays published by Charles Coughlin, eventually finishing everything up by 1941, just in time for the Allies to curb stomp Germany. Yockey didn't seem to care, though. In fact, it only strengthened his conviction. He essentially went, fuck it, I'ma bring this shit back or die trying. However, Yockey had inadvertently made a few enemies on his own side of the aisle because of one little thing that he firmly believed in. That being that the far right and far left needed to ally. Yep, that's right. Yockey was a fucking Nazbol. Oh, but we are just getting started. The key thing that separates this guy from every other nutjob is his impossible pragmatism. This is best shown through a guy named Lazar Kaganovich. He was, notably, a Jew. The last Jew in the Soviet government, conveniently enough. Well, he was thrown out in 1957 for attempting a coup on Nikita Khrushchev, and Yockey took this and fucking ran. He believed that this meant that communism had fully cleansed itself of, Jewish influence. In his eyes, this was the perfect chance to see his ideology fulfilled to a great extent, and for the rest of his life he constantly made attempts to get his alliance between the far right and the communists. Naturally, most of the other far right Americans weren't too stoked with this, since most were violently opposed to communism and were extremely bent around American exceptionalism, but Yockey didn't care. In fact, he despised the United States. He believed that it was everything wrong with the Western world, that liberalism and consumerism were a fucking disease that would need to be purged from this planet, and that American culture would slowly suck the life out of the rest of Western culture on a spiritual level, bringing about its death faster. He threw his hat in behind any movement around the world that threatened the United States, whether it be communism, Arab nationalism, the non-aligned movement, or various anti-colonial movements. Like I said, man was an undying pragmatist. But what if I told you that wasn't the fun part? Oh, no, we haven't even gotten to his fucking book yet. Backtracking a little, in 1946 he was contracted to be a part of the legal team at the Nuremberg trials, which, of course, he tried his hardest to get them off the hook and get the Allies out of Germany. This failed, and he was fired that same year for his attempted tomfoolery. But during this time he had a, minor epiphany, and kinda just roamed around aimlessly for a year. He eventually arrived at a small inn near British Bay, Ireland, where over the course of a few months of 1947 and 1948, he would write his 600 pages, dear God, book, which he decided to modestly title Imperium, The Philosophy and History of Politics. Simply summed up, in the book he advocates for a brutal and totalitarian path for the preservation of Western culture. This would be achieved by, get this, a united pan-Western empire purged of any and all Jewish and American influence. Holy shit. The man straight up invented racism too. He casually predicts the European Union and essentially calls the idea not good enough and really leans into the need for a spiritual, again with that word, union where nationalism does not exist. The book also serves as a spiritual successor to Spengler's work and hits many of the same notes on the more philosophical side of things. Not going into too much more detail because it's long and a lot of it's pretty boring standard alt-right stuff. Was he batshit insane? Absolutely. But you can't not respect the absolute audacity of this man on some small level. Of course, when you troll this hard, it always catches up with you eventually. The FBI had Yockey on their radar for a decade, but could never quite catch him, until they got lucky. When he returned to the States from abroad in 1960, his suitcase was sent to the wrong airport, and when it was opened, they found a shitload of forged passports and identities that he had been using to dodge the FBI for so long. Game over. He was tracked down and arrested in California, sent to languish in a San Francisco jail cell. Not content to face a trial that would force disclosure of so much that he had worked so hard to build, he would take his own life with a cyanide pill, bringing his fascinating life to a close. So yeah, that's all gone and done. Yockey serves as a perfect example of somebody who's absolutely crazy but generally too smart to know it. Naturally, his work in life has inspired many an alt-right nutcase, but his comparatively strange way of going about things, especially his opinion of communism, make him a very interesting character. If you can stomach a book as long as it is, I'd say Imperium is a fascinating read, although I can't really recommend it because, like I said, most of it's kind of boring. Just try not to take anything to heart. And if anyone asks, I didn't tell you to read shit. That about does it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.